All right, folks. Well, good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order, the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. If you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. So we're on agenda item number 3, citizen comment period. Any citizens signed up? Thank you, Marissa. Okay, moving on to our business items. Item number 4, approval of the minutes for November 8th, 2023, the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. The minutes were, I know all the commissioners have had a chance to review the minutes. Is there any comments or edits to the minutes? Okay, with that, like to, is there a motion for the?
Motion that we approve the minutes for November 8th, 2023, Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting.
Thank you. I have a motion. Dr. Miller, Commissioner Miller.
Second.
I have a second. Thank you. It's okay. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. Apologize for that. Okay, item 4B, items applicable to the Planning and Zoning Commission discussed at the City Council meeting last week. I'd like to report, last week the City Council went ahead and approved the final plat combining the 1.4 and 1.707 acre tract to create the 3.107 acre tract for the tract to be known as Lot 1, Block 1, the Revival. So that got approved. The other item I'd like to report, Council also approved the 2 appointments that the 2 new commissioners to Planning and Zoning. We have Commissioner Gwen Estrada and Richard Howard. I'd like to congratulate them on being appointed, and we're really excited. We have now a full planning and zoning, and so we're really excited to have them join us. And thank you again for volunteering. And what else do I have here to report? Also, just as an it doesn't really pertain to, well, it sort of pertains to planning and zoning, just more of an informational, if you didn't get a chance to listen in on or be in attendance at the meeting. Also, the council also approved the city logo to be painted on the water storage tank here on 3009, FM 3009, and Shonta just down the street. It's going to look really nice. Excited to see that. Also, there's also a new signage and monument for the Paul Davis Park. So City Council went ahead and approved those design and the implementation of those. So it's not really planning and zoning kind of, but just more informational. I'd like to pass that along to the commission. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I don't know, I'm getting a little old, so things run together a little bit. Was it last, it must have been last month, they introduced, no, I watched the video. It seemed like they introduced one of the new boards or something with the Board of Adjustment, or wasn't it some people, they mentioned some people in the audience.
Yes. Failed to, thank you for bringing that up, Commissioner Miller. There was also a board of adjustments that was set up, and they also appointed for the Board of Adjustment appointments, and those folks, the appointments were, let me read my notes. let me see, Veronica Garcia, David, apologize his last name, Krasinski, I'm sorry, Roy Leatherberry, Liz Templeman, and Jennifer Dalton as an alternate, and Autumn Flanagan. So those folks were appointed to the Board of Adjustments, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Miller. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, thank you. So moving on to basically our item 4C is a Planning and Zoning Commission training session. We'd like to, we have here, we have a little planning and zoning 101. I'd like a more, we have several new commissioners on board, and we have, and this is a good refresher for some of the ones that have been on the commission for a while. And so I think we felt this was a good time to do this training, and I believe Cynthia.
Our city attorney, Cynthia Trevino, will be doing the training session tonight.
Perfect. And so just as we go through the presentation, Cynthia, do you want us, if we have any questions, to ask questions or?
Absolutely.
Or through
Right.
the-
Yeah, this is going to be real informal because my hope is that it be informational for everybody. I know that several of the board members are have been on sit for the board, and I know that our appointees have experience in this area as well. So some of this is going to be fresh, some of it's going to be new, and some of it is just going to be fine-tuning what we already know.
Perfect.
So yes, please feel free to just speak up and let me know if you have a question.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, well, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So, of course, the obvious, community planning. What is it and why do we do it? And, community planning is that process with which we go through and create our policies, our regulations, and all of our policies and procedures are built around the requirements of state law provisions. And so, here we go. I got it going. Yay! And so, frequently, y'all will, at some point in time, y'all will be seeing ordinances and draft ordinances come through, and almost always you are going to see certain language that's in city ordinances, in the actual legislative clauses. You're going to see those languages that say, and all of this is in the best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the city, or it's to promote the general welfare of the community. It's to preserve certain things, especially if we're talking about land use, the safe, orderly, and healthful development of the community. Now, those words actually, they are pulled out of and come from local government code 212, 211, just depending on which, section of the code that we're amending. And they actually have legal significance, right? And so it's not just a pretty phrase, and it's not just part of the legalese that the city attorney's office tosses into your ordinance. It has legal significance. And the reason for that is that when we are working on subdivision, there are certain rules in Chapter 211 of the local government code that says what we can do and what we can for subdivision. In other words, that process of the platting process, right? And then Chapter 212, it talks about, is the zoning chapter of the local government code. And it says, here are the things that a city can regulate via zoning. And so when you see those languages, in the ordinances, and when we reference those things, it has legal significance. And sometimes that's just kind of the background things that the city attorney's office does to make sure, and that's why things come, through our office to make sure that check, do we have not only the intended policy decision, do we have that crafted in a manner that reaches the intent of the city as a whole, but then also, is it a legally defensible position, and have we placed all the legal protections into the ordinance? So That's frequently why we'll say, okay, great, we've gotten through the policy provision, that's now going to go through legal to ensure that those pieces are in there. All right. And of course, then, especially for the Planning and Zoning Commission, what are those tools that we use to reach, community planning? What are the ways that we actually plan for the community? And those are those things that we do every so often. We will, y'all have probably participated in these, either in this community or, a community if you're newer to Garden Ridge. You've invited, you've gotten notice, hey, we're going to have some city workshops and we're going to have some planning meetings, and these things are going to be open for public hearing. And, all of this is the comprehensive plan. In other words, how are we envisioning the rest of the build out of the city of Garden Ridge? How are we thinking about, as things change, how are we talking about infill lots? What are we doing there, to make those changes? So that comprehensive the other 20% is, other types of uses. And so we don't have as much area in the city that's, going to be seeing development as, say, other communities. But the challenge for the planning and zoning, and then, of course, city council, is because we have such a small area that's developed, is how do we make sure that the development there is impactful, and, is what the community as a whole wants. All right, so there's the comprehensive plan. And then, of course, we know about the regulations. There's the zoning ordinance. And we have collectively just recently survived, an overhaul of the zoning ordinance. And just FYI, guys, the subdivision regulation will be coming y'all's way. Preview of coming attractions, for consideration. And so the one thing to keep in mind is that, again, at y'all's level, it is all policy decision-making, right? So planning and zoning helps guide that policy decision, because planning and zoning is the first ones to go out, kind of do that research, hold public hearings, and do a lot of that legwork that ends up with a recommendation to city council, and then city council is the final decision-making authority. And so with that, we think about, areas, neighborhood plans, strategic plans. One thing that we always have to keep in mind as well is city budget. Because, sometimes we have budgetary constraints that as a smaller city that, get taken into consideration about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. So historically, the city of Garden Ridge has always done very well with getting the most bang for its buck with any type of regulations that they're putting on the books. And of course, capital improvement plans, development agreements. We have not been the beneficiary of development agreements simply because our borders are very close to, our neighboring cities. So we've got a lot of, back to back here. Whereas other communities have more rural areas around them that are subject to development agreements before it ever even becomes a consideration of a potential annexation, right? And so just FYI, because I say the word annexation, just as a reminder to everybody that the legislators in the last couple of legislative sessions have really done us a great favor in taking out the burden and worry of annexation, because they have pretty much eviscerated the ability of cities to annex except for voluntary annexation. So I say that facetiously. Geez, thanks, legislators. But, for a long time, that was a big part of community planning, was annexation and how are we going to get there. But as I said, those abilities, it is all voluntary annexation these days pretty much. And so that's just, for better or for worse, one less thing we have to consider and think about. All right.
Question, is that written in stone?
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely written in stone. Now, that's not to say that.
For our interpretation, certainly it is. but can future legislatures go behind and change it? Because to me-
Absolutely. Yeah, and we do see the pendulum swing. If you stay in the business long enough, you see the pendulum swing. You know, we go where there's a lot of, you know, authority pushed down to local government and the local government level. And laws get put on the books that help accomplish that. And then, you know, a few years later, you see this pendulum swing the other way. Those authorities are removed from local government, and so you just have to stay flexible and just kind of roll with the flow. All right. So then the next question comes up, and this one sometimes seems obvious, but, you know, you guys have kind of been in the thick of development for a while, so these things are very obvious, but we do have some clientele that development and the processes of development are very new to them because they have been very rural communities, but now as development pushes out, you know, they're bumping into these issues. All right, and so that leads us to who's actually involved in the development, you know, process in that policy and procedures and regulations process. And so, you know, clearly, you know, city staff, because they're the ones that are fielding those questions and are, you know, really that first line of defense as to, you know, what is coming forward, you know, who is making application, what type of inquiries, you know, is the city seeing? And they help, you know, kind of raise the flag and say, something to consider. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the type of applications we're seeing. Then, of course, you know, city staff does, you know, legwork. That pushes forward to Planning and Zoning Commission. You guys do a lot of the legwork. That pushes forward to City Council as well. But we always need to consider, you know, obviously, you know, our stakeholders, which those are persons that may be looking to invest and invest large amounts of, you know, into the city of their, you know, time and effort and their capital. So we do, you know, need to consider that. And certainly, you know, the public, you know, the residents, the community. And so, you know, that is why, you know, although state law writes into, you know, that legislative process, public hearings and public hearing requirements and certain notice requirements, that's also why the city of Garden Ridge as a whole has frequently done more with getting notice out to the public, right? Because, you know, it's a smaller community. Y'all know each other. Y'all see each other, you know, on a more regular basis. It is not uncommon for y'all to go from this meeting to another meeting or to, you know, being at, you know, some other event. And so community is much tighter knit here in Garden Ridge. And so we always, you know, favor more notice and more opportunities for community involvement. And that's just historically been the Garden Ridge way since I've been serving here. And then, of course, you know, we have businesses here, you know, that are looking to see, and we are looking to see some changes in the types of businesses and commercial activities coming to Garden Ridge, although we have limited areas for that to come into. But certainly, you know, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you know, we may be seeing some areas that will be looking forward and looking for some change and perhaps some infill type of developments, you know, something, you know, further down the line. So it isn't always about what is good for right now. Frequently, we have to think about what is good for 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
That being said, how much should what we know the community leans towards, which is painfully obvious in Garden Ridge? It's a bedroom community. Everybody wants to stay the same, and yet, if we look down the road, we know our tax base is going to be limited somewhere in the future.
Right, right. And
How much of that, what we know, should influence how we vote or recommend the city
you know,
council?
it's obviously a consideration. And so when you have a community that is currently developed the way that the city is, which is, like I said, roughly 80-20, that means ad valorem taxes, property taxes, right? That's how the city, quote, makes money. I mean, that's how, and that's what funds the services that the city provides. And so there's always that push and pull, right? Because when you are a community that is funded mostly by ad valorem taxes, the problem with that is come tax time of year, the very persons that said, hey, don't let that commercial in, don't do that, are the same people that show up, when it's time for the tax hearings and say, don't raise our taxes, you're taxing us too much, don't do it, right? So how do you balance that out? And one of the ways to balance that out is to allow for some limited commercial, right? Because commercial brings what? Sales tax, right? And so sales tax helps, add to the city coffers, to keep that way of life and to keep the level of services that the city is accustomed to. Because what I will tell y'all is that the city as a whole is accustomed to what I refer to as the concierge gold star service from the city. And it is a beautiful thing. It is a wonderful thing because, you guys have attended council meetings and listened in, and how many compliments that the city gets regarding the service that's been provided, whether that's public works, police, utility staff or whatever. And all of that, takes money to keep, train, retain, the level of staffing that you want. And then, of course, to provide the projects, and some of the amenities that folks want, right? So it is certainly a consideration is how do we balance that out? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Cynthia, so I'm trying to understand, could you talk about how renters would be involved in city planning since they don't pay taxes in the city?
Right, they don't, but they are, members of the community, right? Their kids go to school here, they shop here local, for whatever is available, they shop here locally, they attend your churches, they attend your civic groups and all. So they are certainly folks here, that are, part of the community, although they may not actually be paying ad valorem taxes. But to the extent that they are adding to the economy and the base here, because certainly, the property owner is getting the benefit of that lease or that rental agreement. And that, of course, ensures that our properties stay, in good, healthy condition and, maintain the community character that you want. So certainly there's a place for that. And I know there's, neighboring cities have, big issues with short-term rental and such. And so, again, it's, where do we regulate? How far do we regulate? And these days, that case law changes. In the last couple of years, big case law comes out about twice a year, as cases cycle through the appeals process. And what we knew 2 years ago was different than a year ago and is different than what, a big case ruling, regarding the city of Austin and short-term rentals came out, a little bit earlier this year. So, rentals certainly is in flux. All right, and so of course, we've just gone over that. Who's responsible? We've got decision-making, we've got planning support, and we've got the participants. And so you guys are part of the planning support and part of that decision-making because a lot of it will come through planning and zoning first. All right, and so then how this shifts out is who's responsible for what and when. All right, so city council, top of the food chain, they are the final decision makers. They are the ones with final approval. And most of the time, if there is a land use issue, city council is the one that gets sued, right? They're the ones that are going to be on the hook, for anybody that's aggrieved of a decision or a policy made, on and behalf of the city. So city council is always at that top level. And then underneath there, we've got the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so the way this is set up, and this is a little bit of a change, and I will preview a future attraction in upcoming slides. I will give y'all the down and dirty of what the change is, what drove that change, and how we got here. All right, so planning and zoning, though, makes recommendations, zoning recommendations, comprehensive plan recommendations, plat approval recommendations, right? And so your motions will always be, I move that we recommend to the city council to approve, deny, or you know, I move at this time, we need more information, and this has to come back to us, we need a table. But just always keep in mind, you are a recommending body only, good and bad, right? Good in the fact that, you know, frequently, you know, planning and zoning, because you're not the final decision maker. If the group or individuals were to be on the back end of a lawsuit, you guys get cut out of the lawsuit pretty early and pretty quickly, because you don't have the ability to make that final decision that actually affects the property owners. Bad because sometimes you as an individual member of the commission may feel very strongly about something that's coming before you. And the democratic process is that, you know, the majority is going to say, we're going to rule this way, and that's going to go forward with a recommendation, although you may actually be, you know, vehemently opposed to that. And it happens occasionally, you know, and not without good reason, because, you know, that's the idea, right? We have a diverse board on the commission because we want input from a lot of folks to help us make the best decision possible. And so, Planning and Zoning Commission. So this has changed a little bit because in years past, variances came to Planning and Zoning for preliminary review before they went forward to City Council. But that is no longer going to fall within the purview of Planning and Zoning. And like I said, I will get to the detail of that here shortly. All right, Board of Adjustments. So with the last round or the overhaul of the zoning ordinance, we have now established a Board of Adjustment. All right, and so the Board of Adjustment will actually be the ones that hear the variances, special exceptions, and any appeals from an administrative level decision, right? They are a quasi-judicial board, and what that means is that the Board of Adjustment in and of itself is subject to a lawsuit. You know, their decisions can be appealed, right? And so that's going to be new and different for us as we move through it, but, you know, everybody, you know, we're going to go through all of these processes, and I don't foresee that we're going to have any issues. And what we will say is that should the Board of Adjustments ever endure the last round of variance that we went through with City Council's last variance to be heard, we will, whatever is your spiritual guidance, we will pray to that spiritual guidance that they don't have to deal with that anytime soon. All right. And so then, of course, city staff. What is city staff's part in all of this, right? So city staff, as I mentioned, they're the tip of the spear. They're fielding those phone calls. They will be doing the administrative review of applications. They are the ones that look to see is this application, is it administratively complete? Do we have all the information we need in order to proceed on with putting it through the process? And two, we're going to do that preliminary review. Does this actually meet the requirements of our regulations, our development regulations? And we're going to make a recommendation. So these things will come forward to y'all, planning and zoning, that says, here's what we see. Here's where things are all, check, check, check. We just need y'all to make a decision, or perhaps not check, check, check. And here's why maybe y'all want to consider asking for more information. But generally speaking, you're going to be getting some form of staff recommendation that comes with that. And that normally comes from Nancy or whoever Nancy designates to provide that information, right? And then, of course, ultimately, they're responsible for actually issuing the permit, if things get that far. All right, so that's the whole in a nutshell. All right, and so comprehensive plan is up next. So what is that comprehensive plan? So the comprehensive plan gets done every between 5 and 10-ish years is what I will say. You go through and you update that and say, are the decisions that we made 5 and 10 years ago, are they still holding true? Are they sound? Or do we need to rethink our comprehensive plan? And the number one reason that the comprehensive plan, and we need to stay aware of the comprehensive plan, is that because any zoning decisions that get made that come before P&Z for that recommendation and then to City Council is required to be compliant with the comprehensive plan. Okay. And so when I say compliant with the comprehensive plan, that doesn't mean that it has to tick every box, of everything, all our hopes, dreams, and aspirations that we have in the comprehensive plan, but it does have to harmonize and be part of what we projected for certain land uses within the certain zoning districts and what we envision the growth of the city to be. All right. And so I will make a note here that your comprehensive plan is different from your future land use map. Okay. And so the future land use map is truly our future hopes, dreams, and aspirations for certain pieces of property. But as we all know, the flume, as it's referred to, the only real and true way to control property is to own it. And that is a very difficult concept to conceive of, especially when we have, a development that, we have heard from the community. We've got half the community on either side of, the fence of a particular development. And so that it can be difficult. But the future land use plan is not controlling. The comprehensive plan is the actual controlling regulation in conjunction with the subdivision and zoning regulations. All right, so what's in a comprehensive plan? It frequently includes, your future land use. It will frequently include transportation. How are we going to handle growth of city streets and whatnot? What else? Parks. Yes, ours includes parks, how we want parks and trails and amenities to develop out. What else do we have in ours, Miss Nancy? I think that's kind of,
Those are probably the 3 biggest points
I think so.
that I can think of right now.
Yeah. And so, generally speaking, when it is time for review of comprehensive planning and zoning, you guys will have a couple of 2, 3, sometimes more meetings. You will have usually extra meetings to accommodate receiving input from the public. And those meetings, whenever possible, we try to set them up so that they are more informal information gatherings types of sessions. Because frequently, sometimes citizens' comments just doesn't get us there when we want to just really hear from citizens. And I know in the past we've set up boards with vision plans and whatnot, and folks are allowed to tag it and provide some input on it, and just a more holistic approach to where we at and where we going.
Who decides when a comprehensive plan should be reviewed in the city? And
There are 2 things that generally drive that, Dr. Miller. One is just that we all kind of take a look back and said, when is the last time we've updated that? And then, planning and zoning may make that recommendation. It might be time again to, let's think about that. Or are there just maybe a piece of it that we need to think about that? The other driving factor will frequently be, this one is not necessarily as impactful for the city of Garden Ridge as other communities. But if you've been primarily, I'll give you an example, primarily a rural community, and the properties in your community are designed to be 5 acres and more, and suddenly you have several applications a year saying we want to subdivide and make medium and high density, it's time, try to move quickly to get out ahead of it. Because frequently those developers will come out first and start thinking about, they ask, what's your zoning like here? What's your subdivision regulations here? So frequently, cities will start feeling the winds of change and know that it is time to start looking at those sorts of things. Garden Ridge, y'all have stayed relatively stable with your 80-20 split for a little while now. And I anticipate that will stay, the same way, going forward into the future for a while yet.
I agree, but that 80-20's been there a while, like you said, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. However, things around us are changing, I won't say at a snail's pace, but certainly traffic patterns have changed immensely since I've been on the commission, both on 3009 and 2252. And it's easy to see it's going to change significantly more on 2252 and 3009, much more rapidly than we may realize. And that's coupled with the delay that, well, number one, COVID put in the development of the expansion of TxDOT 2252 and the changes on 35 and 1604. And I'm looking at all this going on, and then housing is in there with the developments north of the city. I'm saying, we need to start looking at some other things because it ain't the same as it was as recently as 5 years ago.
Very true, very true. And so certainly, discussions to start considering, amongst the commission, to think about that. Are we at an area now that perhaps we need to look at the comprehensive plan? And perhaps maybe not even the full comprehensive plan, maybe just the transportation portion of that, might need some review. But certainly, those are things to start noting and thinking about. And of course, your first line of defense in all this is put that to city staff, through Nancy, and then, where are we at? When was the last time? And, perhaps, is it time for? Because the one thing with comprehensive plans, as much as you try to ensure that you regulate the cost on updating comprehensive plan, there's a cost to it, right? And it has to get budgeted for. All right. So leads us to subdivision regulations. So subdivision regulations, they can sometimes be the bane of your existence. And in a couple of slides, you will thoroughly understand why. But subdivision, what's the primary purpose of those? It's to subdivide the land. And a subdivision of land is, the parsing out of a parcel or a tract of property into two pieces or more, right? So that's a subdivision. Now, whether anybody intends to do anything with that subdivision is a different matter, but that's the actual subdivision. And the subdivision regulations establishes what our processes and procedures are for platting property and design layout for subdivisions. Now then, the key thing here is the platting and subdivision process is not the same thing as use regulations. And this is where things can get really complicated and really heated very quickly. So I'm going to take the revival because it's fresh on everybody's mind and everybody's come through. And, the plats has come through the platting process through the city subdivision regulations. And I know Mayor said something to the effect of, listen, guys, we're not talking about use yet because of those persons that have come in and spoken either for or against, everybody's talking about the use of the property. And we're not there yet. We are only in that subdivision platting stage, right? And so one of the things that has historically, or that is historically problematic for Planning and Zoning Commission is we want to jump to use. We want to be able to talk about, so what you doing here? Why are you doing it? How are you going to do it? What's it going to look like? What you're building it of? Have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? And all of these things, which really, for the longest time, we've been able to control that as a P&Z, but because we have new members, and so this might be new to y'all, it is very difficult to contain discussions about subdivision and platting to just subdivision and platting. Myself, I am normally appointed to y'all. I feel that all of those things may have a bearing on a project coming through, so I normally give my planning and zoning commissions a little bit more latitude for some of those discussions, but occasionally I will, raise the flag and I will tell the chair, so sorry, we're too far off topic here. It will be frustrating to y'all, and y'all may want to throttle me, and that's okay, but we just have to make sure that we keep y'all on task with what y'all are tasked to do, which is make sure that the subdivision regulations are followed and that we are talking about only those things that are subdivision related. All right, so in subdivision, what do we get to look at as part of subdivision regulations, right? So that's talking about, how many lots are we gonna have, this parcel of property, how many lots is that gonna be divided into? What are the access, what's the street, what's the drainage, what's the utilities, what kind of easements are we going to need there? Are we gonna have parkland dedication? So all of those things are things that go with subdivision regulations. So historically, or at least in my tenure, I don't know that we've actually done a true, quote, subdivision wherein we are taking a 100-acre tract and dividing it into, half-acre tracts and building properties. Again, because that is not how the city is designed and laid out. So normally, the subdivisions for Garden Ridge are normally talking and the platting process is normally talking smaller pieces and smaller parcels, right? And so subdivision, that's what we're talking about. We're making, lots in tracts of property out of one larger tract of property. And the platting process will normally be, we are either dividing or combining, right? And removing property lines and such. And so, the subdivision regulations, I will tell y'all, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at, that's the next city ordinance, I think, that's coming down the pike, land use development.
I'm already working with Bryce and Mr. James on
There you go. And what I will tell y'all is that for our more tenured members of P&Z, y'all are going to be very jealous of the newer members of P&Z, because the newer members, y'all are going to have a tool that y'all have not had that the P&Z has not had in recent years. And the reason for that is that the firm has added a land use consultants team as part of the firm's services. So you will actually have the benefit of certified land use planners to guide you through these processes. And I've been working with our planners now for about a year, since we've had, a little bit more longer with Bryce being on board. And let me tell you, it is land use is no longer the drudgery it was, and it is no longer the painful, oh my gosh, I want to do bad things because I've just endured another round of land use planning. Having a professional consultant on board makes all the difference in the world in your land use planning. And it's going to be, for the tenured members, I promise y'all it's going to be so much better. Because while I know a whole lot about land use planning is not my first thing, right? I'm an attorney first, so frequently I can tell you, that's legal, no. But what I can't tell y'all, or I can give you the benefit of my experience and what I've seen work in other communities and whatnot, but to have the true benefit of a land use planner that says, yes, but have you thought about this? And there's a better or another way to do that, and it gets you there, in a much more efficient process, or it gets you a much better result, makes all the difference in the world. All right, so plats, we talked about plats. When are they required? So they are required when we are dividing tracts into 2 or more properties, and that language there is taken from local government code, and that the section there is 212-004. So we won't spend too much more time on that. All right, so who are the authorities responsible for subdivision regulations and plat approval? So the way that we have it set up in the city's ordinance is that we have a 2-step process. It comes before planning and zoning for that initial recommendation. And then from there, it goes to city council for final approval. And that includes preliminary plats and final plats. And so there's our legal authorities there, you know, what and how we get there. We do have some delegation of approval for minor plats that go to city staff. And city staff does have the ability to punt that over to P&Z, you know, if they feel something is of a nature that needs to have more public awareness to it. Or perhaps it is a little bit more problematic and needs, you know, that more official process to go through. All right. So here's the piece about plat approval that is very unpalatable for everybody. The way that the law is written and has been written for years is that a plat must be approved. It has to be approved if it meets the city's municipal subdivision regulations, right? And so the reason why that can be unsavory at best is because you can have a project come through that has heavy disapproval from the community based on use. But if the plat meets all the subdivision regulations, the governing body and its recommending body has no other option but to approve a plat. And should, you know, that not happen, you know, if you have a litigious property owner who is putting those plats through, you will be on the back end of a lawsuit that will result with one of two things. Either a court order that says, boom, this plat's approved, move on, or boom, send it back down, and thou shalt approve this, right? And so that's the unsavory piece of plat approval. It is a ministerial process. It is a heavily deadline-driven process, and if you miss the deadlines, it results in automatic approval, right? So we just, you know, we are very careful with that. I know that staff, you know, does a good job of informing persons. You know, if you want to make it for this, you know, planning and zoning meeting, here is when you've got to get things, you know, submitted to. Here's where your application needs to be complete, because from there on, we're going to be on that 30-day shot clock of things got to keep moving and keep going. All right. And so all of that, you know, historically, you know, all of that comes in your packet and all that information comes to you so that you can make, you know, you may still have questions. And sometimes, you know, which is not unheard of, sometimes, you know, once you all get in y'all's discussion, somebody's going to note something, or the engineer is going to note something, and then we're going to have to tell the applicant, we're going to need more information from you. And you need to, you know, you're going to have to get that information over to us within, and we're going to table you. And that's okay, as long as we put it through the correct processes. All right, so zoning. So zoning is sometimes, you know, yay, it's what we love, or yay, it's what we don't love, just depending on what it is that we're dealing with. So zoning, what is it, and why do we have it, and why do we need it? Zoning, and this is purely anecdotal, and this is just the city attorney's opinion, zoning is what helps you make a beautiful community the way you have it here in Garden Ridge, right? We have an orderly development of land within the city, and we have, you know, areas that have, you know, certain types of housing, and other areas that maybe not as, you know, the same size of lots, but still the, you know, the same sort of tighter, I'll refer to them as tighter regulations, so that we have a very consistent and nice development of the community, right? And so that's what zoning does, is we select certain areas of the city, you know, and we carve those out into certain districts, and we assign those districts certain regulations, and then, you know, and that is all within the municipal police powers, you know, of the city to do. And so zoning, you know, zoning amendments, you know, it can start through several different ways. And so within our ordinance, we have it that a property owner can come through and apply for a zoning amendment. City staff can put through and make a recommendation, maybe we need a zoning amendment. city council of its own volition can say, hey, P and Z, we want y'all to study this. Perhaps we need, some zoning changes in a certain area, of the city. And so those are all ways that we go through and work up what are going to be the zoning districts within the city of Garden Ridge. Ours are designed heavily residential, and we have much more residential within the city than we do other types of mixed use or business or commercial. All right. So what's the public purpose of zoning? So these are all coming straight from Local Government Code 212. We are promoting, less congestion on streets. We're providing for, secure areas, that can provide safety for, fire, police protections, promoting health, general welfare, adequate light and air, prevent overcrowding of land, undue concentration of population. And this one is becoming more and more important, adequate facilities, right? Adequate facilities, because developers frequently get way out ahead of themselves, and we're going to develop, and it's, the idea is, yeah, great, where are you going to get your water from? Where are you going to get your sewer from? How are you impacting the traffic in the area? Are the streets, the access to and from, are they designed? And this all goes back to the things Dr. Miller was just talking about. How are you impacting those things? And again, thoughtful development is not only how am I impacting the city right here, but we are in close proximity to our neighbors here. How are we impacting them? Because theoretically, everybody should be making good decisions, be good neighbors, but that's not always the case. And so at the end of the day, we can only control what we can control. And so the city, we look to do that in the best way possible, and P&Z, y'all have a hand in that. All right, so here, these are things that commonly get regulated through your zoning and land use. And so it's the height of buildings, the size of buildings, percentage of lot, the impermeable cover, that is, of particular importance here in Garden Ridge. Size of yards, setbacks, front setbacks, side setbacks, density. Garden Ridge has historically had lower density. And there are some densities that have been proposed to the city that developers have pitched as low density or moderate density. In many other locales, they are actually moderate or low density, but for the city of Garden Ridge, under our ordinances and such, that's high density, and we need to rethink your project. We don't necessarily have things set up for high density. And that's a police power function that the city has, and that's your ability to control the growth of your city. All right, locations, land use, business, industrial, bulk and size of building, historical districts, cultural districts. We don't necessarily have a historic district. I know, I'll give you all an example. I also serve as city attorney over for the city of Castroville. They have properties that are actually designated by the state as, historic properties, right? They're the old Alsatian homes that got built by the settlers, right? And they actually have historic districts because they have some areas of town that were originally, developed in the 1800s, as the core center of the city of Castroville, right? So they have true historic districts, right? At some point in the future, there's going to be folks maybe sitting here that says, we're now ready to set up a historic district in the city of Garden Ridge because Garden Ridge will have hit a certain milestone in its existence as a municipal corporation. So just things to think about. All right, so zoning. It is a discretionary function. And so, with that, I'm not sure what this message is. Okay, gotcha. So zoning is discretionary, that y'all have the ability to pick and choose. The only thing that I will say is that zoning, there is a lot of law about zoning, And the two things that we always need to be worried about zoning is we need to be careful of creating what Bryce has lovingly terms the sin district, right? So, you know, larger communities, say the city of San Antonio, they have some areas where there are some uses there that are perfectly viable and are acceptable uses for, you know, a city of that size that get kind of put way off over there. But you can't regulate them completely out of the city, right? We can kind of put them in areas where they're maybe not quite so prominent. Sexually oriented businesses are the ones that usually, you know, come to mind. So we have to be careful about that because, you know, there's case law that says, yeah, that's, you know, that is a legal right that people have, and so you can't completely zone them out of your city. And there are some other, you know, types of uses that kind of get referred to as the sin types of uses. And so way back in the day, you know, tattoo shops were kind of frowned upon, although body art now these days is no longer frowned upon, right? And so things change. And so that's the kind of the thing to keep in mind with zoning. Things change. So planning and zoning versus the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So this is a piece for Dr. Miller. All right. So how do we divide all this out? So planning and zoning, you perform advisory functions, right? You're a recommending body only. You help develop the comprehensive plan. You know, help with reviews and reports and reviewing those reports, you know, coming from staff and make recommendations. And generally your focus is on large-scale planning issues, right? You guys meet on a regular basis because there was things always coming through planning and zoning. There will occasionally be a time when a meeting gets canceled because perhaps there's not something on, but planning and zoning, you guys meet on a regular basis because you have a different function. The Zoning Board of Adjustment. So this is a new creature. And so the Zoning Board of Adjustment is an action agency, and it deals with individualized property by property basis. It is quasi-judicial, and they only meet if there is a need for them to meet. So you can, I mean, we have had long periods of time where the city receives no applications for variances, and so the Board of Adjustment would not meet. But that's going to be their job, is to hear those variances, special exceptions, and any appeals of an administrative decision. All right, so the Zoning Board of Adjustment, you know, they will be getting their own training. They have very specialized legal hurdles that they have to clear in reviewing and granting variances. It is very stringent. It is very much subject to challenge. And these days, we're seeing more and more, you know, legal challenges to variance decisions. And that's just kind of the world as a whole has shifted post-pandemic. But that's the big difference these days between P&Z and the BOA. All right, so then, the ZBOA, the Zoning Board of Adjustments. This is new, and the whys it's and how comes it's. And so, written into the local government code, if you are a type A general law city, your city council can serve as your Zoning Board of Adjustment. That is a policy decision that gets made. And historically, that has always been on the books for the city of Garden Ridge. And historically, planning and zoning served in that city staff capacity, right? And then fast forward, probably about 2 years ago, case law changed. And so there was some rulings that came out that said city staff, or the planning and zoning, you really cannot serve in that capacity anymore. And so that came to a head because we had a variance coming through that we processed through our normal processes, and then we started getting pushback from the property owner's attorney. And so we had to make some really quick on-the-fly legal decisions for and on behalf of the city to make sure that if we did get challenged, that would not be a basis for challenge, right? And then the other piece out of all of this is that home rule status. So when the city moves to home rule, the ability for city council to sit as the zoning board of adjustment is no longer an option. The local government code says, that is only for type A general law cities. So hence the move towards getting the zoning board of adjustment updated. We knew at the time that we were drafting the zoning overhaul that this is where the city was moving towards, and very likely the city would go through the election and become a home rule city. And so the planning and zoning made that decision to plan for that and get that written into it so that we wouldn't have to revisit that and go through another, or make y'all suffer any PTSD from the zoning ordinance overhaul. All right. So of course, as y'all all have figured out, and y'all are not idiots, so I'm not gonna, bear on this one too much, but there's a lot of variables. Some we can control, the collective we, being, city and the city government. There are some we can control and some we cannot. And so these are a couple of things that for our land use planners, they ask that we, kind of go over these, with all of our groups, things that they see because they work, with the land use, and both of our land use planners, again, certified land use planners, that's what they went to school for, that's what they've done. They've had past careers as in-house city planners for large cities, in and around Texas. So here, the benefit of their experience is the thing to watch out for. More regulations doesn't necessarily mean you get a better result. And one of the pieces that we wrote into the city's current code is the plan unit development, the PUD, right? Because what we have figured out and what we've learned, again, through leaning on their knowledge, is that when we have the ability to negotiate for certain things, the city can move towards getting the type of development it wants, because there's that ability to have some give and take and negotiate for things that are, for lack of a better term, higher value to the city. And what drives that is the 2019 legislative changes. So for years and years and years, the cities were able to control building material. You could control what people built their houses out of. And so you could say this district is masonry only district. And this district is, you need to have a certain amount of masonry on your, in your construction. And this other section of your residential can have stick built, older types of building materials. And in 2019, the legislators helped us out, and they said, y'all are not gonna have to think about that too much anymore, because we're gonna remove that ability from you, and we're gonna pass a law. It's chapter 3000 of the government code, and it says, dear cities, thou shalt allow the use of any building material that's authorized within the last 3 cycles of your adopted building code. Right, so everybody goes through, most cities adopt an international building code, and in the international building code, it goes through and it says, these are all the things you are permitted to use to build residential structures with. So the legislator said, y'all don't need to worry about that. Y'all just gonna let them build to whatever that is. So whatever is within the 3 rounds of codes. And the reason that can be problematic is because in the 2021 International Building Code, I call them Connex boxes. I don't know what else to call them, but y'all know what I mean. The shipping containers, right? Yeah, guess what's now an official building code approved building material? Shipping containers. Right? Now then, most people have the good sense, Most people have the good sense to say, you know, I'm not going to go pay a big chunk of money for a piece of property in Garden Ridge because, you know, your land values, you know, have a certain value compared to, you know, perhaps some, you know, neighboring or other areas within the state of Texas. I'm not going to go pay this huge chunk of money and then plunk down a Connex box on that because I want to make my money off of whatever I invested, right? Because that's what usually drives the market. But the problem is going to be for that one person out there. So hopefully they will find a better place to build. We, knock on wood, that we don't ever have to face on that. But again, that, you know, those are going to be problematic issues, and we'll deal with those if we have to. All right. So more regulation doesn't necessarily equal better regulations or better results. Increased design standards doesn't necessarily mean higher quality development. So those are things that we struggled with in the collective we, because three of the P&Z members, remember, we lived through the technical committees, and it was painful.
It was long and drawn out.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Because, you know, we wanted to ensure that we retain that same type of high development that the city has grown accustomed to. The one thing, city codes are the only thing that regulate development, and that is not necessarily true, right? Because what is the biggest driving factor of development? Land use and what's for sale, right? And smaller communities struggle with this because frequently there will be larger pieces of property that have remained in the city, and have remained, say, in the family forever and ever and ever. But now Mr. Developer comes with 2 or 3 suitcases full of money to the heirs of the property owner, and, you know, the heirs of the property owner, you know, maybe they don't live here, you know, maybe they've never lived here, and they don't feel that same loyalty to, you know, as the previous owners did, and they're like, great, we'll take it, it's yours. Right? Because again, we go back to what I mentioned at the beginning, is the only true way to control land is to own it. Right. So, you know, something to think about. And I'm not suggesting that we start, you know, crowdsourcing funds so we can buy up all the land in Garden Ridge. But truly, at the end of the day, you know, we live in the state of Texas. While the city has a lot of ability to regulate, you know, the state of Texas, we pride ourselves in private property ownership and private citizens' rights, right? That's a hallmark of being a Texan. And so, you know, trying to find that balance for sure. I know historically, this one is not as big of a problem for Garden Ridge as perhaps other, you know, other communities, but, you know, if we allow this to go in, good gravy, you know, Katie bar the door, what else is coming? Then everybody else will want to do it. There is some truth and you know, some not truth, some falsities, you know, with that theory. And the biggest one, I think, overall that I bump into a lot, because I am assigned to several of our smaller clients, more rural clients, our community will never change, and whatever the use is, nobody wants it. Those two things I find are the true biggest miss with land use development, is our community won't change, it will never change, and nobody wants fill in the blank. I will give you a, for instance, some of these cities suburban to our larger cities, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, right? Some of the smaller communities around there have seen businesses move out to them of the type that they never thought that they would see in their communities. Vape shops, they are a hot topic item in other areas around Texas. And it's like, nobody wants that. It's like, are you sure? Somebody's fixing to put in a bunch of money into a vape shop, and why do you think that is? Because they have conducted a market study. They have figured this out. There is a want and a need for that. Now, maybe that want and need isn't the person that's showing up to speak at, you know, citizens' comments during publicly scheduled meetings. But frequently, you know, if you are seeing a change in those in uses and a change in what's being proposed, it is because somebody has done the research and there is very likely a want or a need for that in your community. It might start out as a smaller need or a want, but it's the guidepost and the signpost that something is changing within the larger community surrounding the city. All right. And then I'm going to call this section the elephants in the room, because these are the things that, we need to discuss and talk about. They sometimes not the most fun things to talk about, but we need to talk about them so that we are all on the same page and we all know the what's and whys. Land use regulations in the ETJ, right? Ugh. Right? We have very limited land use regulations in the ETJ. Nancy, do we have an agreement with Comal County whose subdivision regs control in the ETJ? I don't remember.
It would be joint.
Joint,
They
okay.
should bring those to us. We should be able to sign off on that.
All right, so we do have subdivision regulations. The thing that we don't have in the ETJ is zoning regulations, right? And those are the things that we really and truly want out in the ETJ more than anything else in the whole wide world. But we don't have those authorities, and it can be difficult at best. And Garden Ridge historically has done a good job of trying to work with those persons that are out in the ETJ, work with addressing concerns that are in the ETJ that might impact, some of our subdivisions and some of our, residential areas. But at the end of the day, we don't have those land use abilities out there in the ETJ. Changing demographics, cities change, right? And so a city that was historically, we started out, the city of Garden Ridge started out as a city planned and incorporated by military persons. And, there was a large military influx, large military families. That's changed. Historically, the median age in Garden Ridge, has been a higher age. But that's, I bet you if we did a count today, we could see that there's that shift, right? We have younger families coming in. And so those things change, right? And those types of changes, also drive your land use changes and your planning changes, right? Because younger families, might want different forms of housing. Younger families might want or need daycare in community services. An aging population might want to stay in the city of Garden Ridge, but they might not want a large property. They might not be able to care for it. They might not be able to afford to pay somebody to care for it. So, all things to consider is how does our current populace affect our decision-making processes. And then regulatory takings. And so, this is something that we are always mindful of, and, that's why legal always gets last dibs on review and recommendation, right? Because we all are familiar with condemnation. A local government can come through and say, I need, for the good and for a public purpose, I'm going to condemn, this section of your property, pay you the fair market value for that, and I'm, quote, taking your property for government use. Because maybe I need a street there, maybe I need to build detention there, or maybe I need it for firehouse or police, some sort of emergency services, right? That's condemnation, that's takings, and we're all familiar with that. But the thing a lot of folks are not familiar are regulatory takings, also referred to as inverse condemnation. And this is when a local government's regulations are of such a nature that it deprives the property owner of the use of that property or their investment-backed expectation of that property. In other words, we have, tightened up and tightened down so much that you can't use the property. And if the regulations go that far, that is an inverse condemnation, and that is subject to a lawsuit and, subject to, the city, quote, having purchased that property. And it can happen inadvertently, and that's why we say we always kind of get the last draw on that. So I will give you an example. Setbacks. Yeah, property of a certain size. And we're like, well, historically, we've always had, 15-foot setbacks. And we think that we need to increase that setback. We want, things even set back further than the property so we can keep that nice rural feel up front, and we want to keep that trees and foliage up front and all that sort of good stuff. So now, we're going to increase that setback. And I got to thinking about it, and wouldn't it help with noise or whatever if we said, let's move in your side, increase the side setbacks, and let's also increase that, and now, we have this perfectly lovely lot, but now people can only build on that little piece, right? So, things to consider. And sometimes that's where the land use planner is going to say, eek, here's what it is, but here's another way that we can get there. And so that's sometimes how that things happen, because we get to thinking about it, and it's not until after the fact that when we see it all out, put out in writing, it's like, oh, well, that's not what we meant to do. That's not what we intended to do. Let's think back a little bit more on that. All right, regulatory takings. So that's that. And then the other piece, only because it rears its ugly head from every now and again, the quarry, right? The quarry. It is what it is, and it was here first. And I know from time to time people, will approach planning and zoning or city council and say, let's fight the quarry. And certainly the city has done a great job with those things that it has the ability to control. And that's, sometimes that one falls into that piece of what can we control, what are we not allowed to control, what we can't control, and then vice versa is what can't we not control because it is a billion-dollar business and we are not. So just always, things to consider. All right. Won't beat that one up too much there, and we're coming into the last couple of slides here, folks. So these are things that are very obvious. These are things that I have historically been a privilege to be a part of here in Garden Ridge. Respectful, thoughtful, compassionate, realistic, fair, and informed decision-making process. I share this story with y'all just because it's a fun story to tell, but this happened to me probably in my first year or so of serving with Garden Ridge. This is a second career for me, and so I was, a fairly newly licensed attorney and all, and so I came to a meeting, and the council discussed something at length, and, they really, shook it out, backwards, forwards. We talked all about it. They made a decision. We moved forward. And at the end of the meeting, I had 2 council members approach me and say, we're so sorry that you had to endure that. We don't normally fight like that, and we apologize that. I was like, a fight? That was a fight? That was like, to me, it didn't even register as a form of disagreement, because I have been in council meetings where real fights have broken out. I mean, people have come to blows. And so, an orderly discussion with weighing out pros and cons and people being very, very firm in what their beliefs were didn't even register to me, because it was done in a very professional, courteous, respectful manner. And so I would suggest to you all that that is y'all's hallmark, and I hope that it always stays that way, because it makes my life easier. But certainly, there's always room there are always room for people to disagree, and sometimes the democratic process will play out, and it sometimes will be something that you liked, and sometimes not. But it is the process, and we just need to keep that in mind. Of course, the land use continuum. I know I've mentioned it several times, but every project that comes before in land use in general, it's always on a sliding scale, because you're always going to have folks on either side, strongly opposed, strongly in favor, but frequently you're going to have folks that are right there in the middle, and it's how do we make sure that we hear from everybody, not just those folks that have been vocal about it, to make sure that we're making the best decision. And, that is a difficult task, but I am fully confident that y'all are up to the task. But, it is a continuum. Land use is always a continuum because, again, what was good 10 years ago is not today. What's very good today might not be, 10 years down the road. And this one, if for those of y'all who have not worked with Bryce, y'all can tell this is totally a Bryce slide. Thought cookies for a hungry brain. And so these are the things that when the land use planners will work with y'all, they were going to kind of help guide y'all through these things, and just think about your regulations, should focus on elements that are most important to the community. And there isn't a need to regulate everything, just those things that are of most value. Because sometimes, what one community is struggling with is, of no import to the city of Garden Ridge. Scooters. Your more urban neighbors battled and struggled with scooters because there's a lot of sidewalks that you can ride a scooter on, and there's a lot of paved scooters. Never even a blip on our radar because good luck to you. Because there's lots of areas that don't have sidewalks. And so that's a very easy and obvious one to think about, but again, simply because it's a challenge somewhere doesn't necessarily mean it's a challenge for your community. Incremental growth, incremental development, letting that growth be a little bit more holistic, more organic, is always, kind of a good thought process on developing out, what your policies and decision-making process wants to be. Land use in and of itself, one piece at a time. A small piece is, frequently part of a larger development puzzle. And then, as we make our decision-making is just that idea of responsible planning, because sometimes the loudest voice isn't necessarily the voice of the majority of the community. And we see that these days, just, in the country, just in general, right? Sometimes the loudest, most vociferous person is just like, oh my, that's not how the rest of the community feels about this. Historically, not an issue for Garden Ridge, but, again, just things to think about. All right, and so with that, there's all our contact information. And so those of you that are newer, all my contact information is there. What we normally say is run it through city staff first, because frequently they may have, everything that you need or want. But there are times when it's not, and they will let you know that it gets forwarded on to me, and I'll get a response back to y'all, so that y'all can have the benefit of that if you need it. So, any questions? Anything we'd like to? Yeah.
This was a good presentation. Is it meant to, or will your firm have their, I don't know if it was annual or not, training session? Always seems like it's always February or March. Your firm has a training session that we're invited to. Is it an annual thing, or will we still be invited?
Yes. So ACOG has training sessions throughout the year, and theirs, are on a different fluctuating schedule. We normally have Hog Wild in July. And so that is always land use heavy planning, because, land use is a big portion of what all cities do. And so, and it's a free event. The ACOG things are frequently free events as well. I'm trying to think of who else. I think ACOG and
ACOG and Hog Wild, when we do get notification of the the ACOG training, because generally that is specific, they'll have a training event that is specific to planning and zoning. We always forward that out to the Planning and Zoning Commission members. You have to register for it. I don't recall if there's usually a link or if you usually go through city staff here to register. But we support y'all attending that event and obtaining continual education in this area. Hog Wild, we can, once we get that information, we can forward that out to the commission members as well.
And just FYI, historically, Hog Wild will fall on either my birthday or Clarissa's birthday, but you're not required to bring presents. Your presence there is present enough. And so with that, I thank you all so much. I did take this at a little bit slower pace, and my apologies for that, because I know that the brain retains what the backside endures. So this did go a little bit long, but I thank y'all for your patience.
Cynthia, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate it. I'm sure all commissioners, especially our new ones, really appreciate this training session. Very informative, especially also for our existing ones that have been our 10-year ones. A good refresher. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Okay.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to say thank you for presenting it so very clearly.
We tried.
So, like Nancy and Cynthia mentioned about the other trainings that go on through the ACOG and Hog Wild, just keep an eye out on your email. That usually comes from Marissa, our city secretary, and there's a link there because I've attended, I think, 1 or 2 of the ACOG trainings, and it's very simple. Just you register, and very easy to do that, and there's no fee. So, okay. Well, moving on to item number 5, any citizen comment period. Do we have any citizens? No. Any takers? Okay. So next item is adjournment. Before we adjourn, I'd like to just say, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and Happy New Year to everyone. Enjoy the holidays. Be safe. And so,
I have something I wanted to bring up, and it's for the city attorney. We have in attendance, oftentimes, city council members, and they're certainly welcome, but we don't recognize them. Should we be recognizing them to add some more, not formality, but legitimacy to some of the things we do, so the citizens watching from home know that we're not just flying by the seat of our pants all the time?
Unfortunately, okay. Go back and turn on here. Yeah, unfortunately, what I would suggest you, Dr. Miller, is that we do not. This commission should be exercising independent, thought processes and all. And, for those folks who might believe y'all are flying by the seat of your pants, they're just going to have to live with that thought. Or come to a meeting. There you go. Right. And see that pesky city attorney over there going.
well, I move for adjournment. It's 7:28.
I move for adjournment at 7:28.
I second.
Sorry about that. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor? To adjourn?
Aye.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Stand adjourned.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.